Hi, I'm Marci Hamilton. I'm the CEO and the Academic Director of Child USA, and I'm the Fox Professor of Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. Before I went into teaching, I clerked for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor at the United States Supreme Court. I'm here today because I'd like to talk to you about child sex abuse statutes of limitations. I've been working on this issue for nearly 20 years, and the reason I am so passionate about it is because the primary reason that most victims of child sex abuse never get access to justice is just the deadline. It's the statutes of limitations. And so I've been working on statutes of limitations, or SOL reform, as I said, for nearly 20 years. I wrote the book on the issue. It's called Justice Denied: What America Must Do to Protect Its Children. And the short answer to what we must do is to eliminate the statutes of limitations. We have two arenas where work is needed. One is the civil statute of limitations. One is the criminal statute of limitations. Victims face two barriers to coming forward. The first one is the power imbalance that they have with the perpetrator. The perpetrator is either a father, a teacher, a coach, someone who has power over them, who either threatens them, or in some cases, the child just doesn't understand what's going on and they have too much shame and humiliation to come forward. But there's also a medical reason these victims don't come forward, and that is the effect of trauma on the human body. Trauma affects these victims in a myriad of ways, but primarily we see issues with PTSD, depression, addiction to both drugs and alcohol, and we also see a much higher risk of suicide. So for many of these victims, they simply can't come forward until they're in adulthood. And so for most of the states, in the last 20 years, they have been considering how to fix this problem. Nobody wants child sex abuse victims to have no justice, and certainly nobody wants to give hidden predators the advantage of a law that lets them work undercover and get one victim after another. And so most of the states are engaging in SOL reform. The statute of limitations is just a formality. It is a barrier to entering the courthouse. It's just a deadline. For everyone who faces a statute of limitations in a contract case, everybody knows, well, you have to get to court by a certain time or you won't have a claim anymore. At the other end of the statute of limitations universe is there's no statute of limitations on murder. Child sex abuse between a contract and murder is much closer to the murder end of the spectrum for statutes of limitations. These victims don't have power. They don't understand what's happening to them. And because of the effects of the trauma, they just can't come forward fast enough. So the one and only crime that should have no statute of limitations, just like murder, in my view, is child sex abuse. And so the elimination of the criminal statute of limitations is very important. But for all those victims that had absolutely no shot at justice, are standing here now with expired SOLs, the only thing that you can do for them is to revive those expired SOLs by providing a civil lawsuit opportunity. Child sex abuse victims tend not to come forward. A third might come forward during childhood, a third never come forward. That other third comes forward between age of majority, 18, up to the end of life. So the median age for a child sex abuse victim to come forward is age 48. So that the statutes of limitations must be at least that long to capture half of the victims that we know about. Nobody wants child sex abuse victims to have no justice, and certainly nobody wants to give hidden predators the advantage of a law that lets them work undercover and get one victim after another. And so most of the states are engaging in SOL reform. In 2002, the Spotlight series appeared by the Boston Globe. Of course, went on to become an Academy Award-winning movie. But the real purpose of those disclosures was to let the country know that, in fact, we don't just have random sex abuse that is uncommon. In fact, it happens frequently and it's often institution-based. In other words, institutions negligently, recklessly, and sometimes intentionally ignore the facts of abuse. And in those circumstances, our victims particularly need help with the statutes of limitations because it's these institutions that have the power to keep the secret so well. What victims do with statute of limitations reform is they empower themselves. They often heal themselves dramatically, but they also help all of the children in the state. Since 2002, 38 states have amended their statutes of limitations to create more justice for the victims. Only 13 have done nothing. Among those 13 is Michigan. And Michigan needs to do more than the rest of the country. Michigan has the single worst civil statute of limitations in the country at age 19. When the average age to come forward is 48, an age 19 cap on civil claims means the vast majority are just simply never brought. But what that also means is that Michigan is harboring many pedophiles that are currently taking advantage of Michigan's very short statute of limitations. The Michigan criminal statute of limitations is not the worst in the country, but it is also behind the curve. In the United States, the vast majority of the states are eliminating the felony criminal statutes of limitations. A number of states are also eliminating all of the misdemeanors statutes of limitations. And so what that means is that a state that has only eliminated one category of child sex abuse crimes from the statute of limitations is in the minority. Michigan is one of those states. It has only eliminated the criminal SOL for felony sex abuse. So the state of Michigan has a great deal to do in order to, one, get justice to these victims, but two, to identify the hidden predators in the state. The only way to do that is to find a way to help the victims from the past and find a way to do something about the victims right now and going into the future. On the civil side, there are two pathways. For the victims from the past, every state that is considering this is reviving the expired statutes of limitations. They are either creating a window, a short period of time in which there is no statute of limitations for any child sex abuse victim. We've had 6 states do that. Or they are extending the statutes of limitations to a certain age, Massachusetts 53, Connecticut 48. In those states, they are saying that everybody gets to come forward until that age into perpetuity. Michigan now is considering what would be the shortest window in the country. It's currently considering a window that would only allow victims to come forward up until the age of 48. As the shortest window in the country, it will still provide justice to many victims, the ones who have been abused since 1996, and the ones that figure out to get inside the 1 year in which they can come forward. But there is often opposition to reviving the expired statutes of limitations. Why? Because institutions argue that they are going to be subject to liability and to an avalanche of claims. That is simply not true. In California in 2003, the state had no statute of limitations for either the civil or criminal claims. The United States Supreme Court held that it was unconstitutional to revive the criminal SOLs. That's just not an option under Stogner v. California. But the courts have held that you can revive expired civil statutes of limitations, and it's the only option for all those victims from the past that have been shut out. California had only 1,150 victims that came forward during the 2003 window. If you think about it, that's a tiny percentage of the population, especially compared to the fact that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. That means roughly 20 to 25% of the state's population has likely been sexually abused in some way. When only 1,150 come forward, you know that this bill is worth it, but it is not a matter of the sky falling. Let's look at Delaware. Delaware had a 2-year window from 2007 to 2009. About 175 victims came forward. But then we learned about a pediatrician that nobody knew was sexually abusing hundreds of children. 1,000 victims came forward because of this one pediatrician. Dr. Earl Bradley would not have been identified as a pedophile but for the window that was open in the state of Delaware. In all other states that have revived expired statutes of limitations, there has not been a large number of cases that have either put unreasonable burdens on prosecutors or on the civil court system. In fact, it's usually a relatively small number of cases. And the reason for that is that many victims actually won't want to go to court. Many don't. But for the ones who want justice and deserve it, opening up the statutes of limitations is the only way to help them.